All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling something that I think is super important. And that is, we talk a lot about how drugs get approved, but we don't always talk about what happens after that approval when the drug actually gets out there into the real world.
Yeah. And, for all of you out there who like to cut to the chase, basically, this deep dive is your shortcut to understanding how we continue to learn about how safe and effective medications are long after they've been approved.
I love that cut to the chase. That's what this show is all about. So we've got a lot to cover today. We're looking at studies, the science behind how drugs are regulated, and the systems that, like you said, are in place to monitor them after they're out there.
Our mission is really to give you all a clear understanding of how real-world evidence, RWE, is used to ensure that these drugs continue to be safe and effective, and how they actually inform the decisions that are made about them over time.
Okay, so let's get right to it. First, can you just break down what exactly real-world evidence is? It sounds pretty straightforward, but I feel like there's nuance to it.
Yeah, it's a really good question to start with because it's important to understand how it's different from the data that's used to initially approve a drug. That process relies very heavily on clinical trials, which are very controlled environments. Real-world evidence comes from, well, the real world, from observing how medications are used and what happens in everyday medical practice. So it's less about those controlled settings and more about the actual experience of using these medications in a complex healthcare environment.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. But if it's not from clinical trials, where does this real-world information come from? I mean, are we just, like, asking people on the street?
No, not exactly. There are actually a few key sources that provide really valuable information. One of them is electronic health records, or EHRs. So, these are the digital records that your doctor uses to track your health information.
Right, yeah.
Those records contain a ton of detail about your health journey. That includes the medications you've taken, dosages, how they've been combined with other treatments, and, of course, the outcomes. So when you look at this kind of data for a lot of patients, it can reveal some pretty significant insights into how a drug performs in different populations and under various real-world conditions.
So it's like a massive database of everyone's experiences with a certain treatment.
Exactly, yeah. And another big source of data comes from insurance claims. They're mainly for billing purposes, but when you look at that information across large numbers of people, it can show patterns in how frequently medications are prescribed, the costs associated with different treatment approaches, and even broader trends in patient outcomes. Kind of give you a big picture view of medication use in the real world.
It's like seeing who's getting which drugs and what the overall impact is on their health and healthcare costs. That makes a lot of sense. So we've got EHRs and insurance claims. What else?
We also have patient registries. These are a bit more focused. They're designed to collect very specific and consistent information on groups of individuals who all share a particular condition or disease. They often track the treatments patients receive and their progress over time in a structured way, which allows for in-depth analysis within those specific patient populations.
Okay, so it's a way to dive deep into how a drug works for people with a certain disease, right? Now, I remember reading about something that I found really interesting. It said that AI, artificial intelligence, and even social media could be used for real-world evidence. And I'm thinking, how is that even possible?
Oh yeah, that's a super interesting area. You know how much information patients share online these days? In forums, on social media, and in disease-specific communities like patients like me?
Right. I mean, people talk about everything online, but
Well, the thing is, AI tools can actually be used to analyze all of that unstructured text data and identify recurring themes. Like, what side effects are people reporting? Or how effective do they perceive a drug to be? It's kind of like tapping into the collective lived experience of patients.
wow. It's like turning online chatter into actual data points that you can analyze. I actually remember reading about 23andMe partnering on Parkinson's research, and then there's Diabetes Connect, which offers something called information therapy. Are those examples of that kind of thing?
Exactly. They're really good examples of how we can use these platforms to learn more about disease progression and how people are actually responding to treatments in their daily lives. And then, of course, you have services like iGuard, which directly collect data on medication side effects and drug interactions as they occur.
So we're pulling in data from so many different places: electronic records, insurance claims, patient conversations, and even specialized monitoring services. It's a lot to manage. How do we even begin to make sense of it all?
That's where the analytic platforms and methods come in. And honestly, Some of these tools are pretty sophisticated. Like one of the key applications is what we call AI-driven signal detection.
I'm intrigued. What is that exactly?
Well, imagine you have these huge data sets, EHRs, claims data, registries, and you need to sift through them all to find those needles in the haystack. So we use algorithms to look for potential safety issues, unexpected patterns in how well a drug is working, or any other kind of red flag. These signals might be really subtle and wouldn't necessarily have been obvious in the initial, smaller clinical trials.
So the AI is like a detective looking for clues that something might be off.
Yes, precisely. And then there are machine learning models. Those can take all that real-world data and actually build predictive models. So, for example, they can help us understand which patients are most likely to benefit from a particular drug or who might be at a higher risk of experiencing side effects based on those real-world patterns.
That's amazing. So it's like personalized medicine, but based on real data and not just a guess.
Yeah, exactly.
You also mentioned post-market surveillance programs. How does all this real-world evidence we've been talking about actually get used in those programs?
Well, post-market surveillance is basically the process of continuously monitoring the safety and effectiveness of a drug after it's been approved and is out there being used by a lot of people.
Makes sense. Keep an eye on things, right?
Yeah. And RWE is really the driving force behind those programs. By constantly analyzing all that data from EHRs, claims, patient reports, and those monitoring services, we can get a much clearer picture of the long-term effects and the safety profiles of these medications, especially in diverse groups of patients, patients who might have multiple health conditions or be taking other medications, things like that. Those factors might not have been fully captured in the initial clinical trial.
Right. So it's like a constant feedback loop, learning more and more as the drug is used more widely. But all this information has to go somewhere, right? I mean, how does it impact the decisions made by regulatory agencies like the FDA?
That's where the real impact of real-world evidence comes in. Agencies like the FDA are increasingly using RWE to make decisions about approved drugs. They're not just giving a drug the green light and then walking away. Their oversight continues throughout the entire life cycle of the medication, including this crucial post-market surveillance phase. It's all about managing risk and making sure that drugs remain safe and effective for the people who need them.
And the FDA has that Office of Regulatory Affairs, right? I remember reading that they're involved in monitoring clinical trials. So how does their work connect to the real-world evidence that's collected later?
Yeah, that's the ORA. Their primary focus is on making sure clinical trials are done properly and reviewing those initial results before a drug even gets approved. So it's like they're laying the groundwork. But sometimes the things we learn from real-world evidence after a drug is already out there can actually prompt the FDA to go back and take another look at the original clinical trial data. They might want to see if anything in those early trials could explain a signal that popped up later in the real world. It all kind of works together.
Okay, so it's not just separate processes, it's all interconnected. So what happens when the FDA does find something concerning in the real-world data? I mean, what are the tangible outcomes of this RWE analysis?
Well, the findings from real-world evidence can actually lead to changes in how a drug is used. Like one outcome is that it can lead to updates in the drug's labeling. So, for example, if the data reveals a side effect that wasn't previously known, or if it identifies a particular risk for a specific group of patients, the FDA might require the drug manufacturer to update the official prescribing information, so it reflects that new information. Or if they find that a drug is particularly effective for a certain group of patients that wasn't initially identified in the clinical trials, the label could be updated to reflect that new understanding.
It's like making sure that the information about a drug is as accurate as possible and reflects what's actually happening out there in the real world. Now, what about when those safety concerns do pop up? How does RWE help us develop strategies to minimize the risks?
RWE plays a big role in that too. It can be really helpful in figuring out whether we need risk mitigation strategies and what those strategies should be. For instance, if the real-world data suggests that there's a higher risk of a particular adverse event than we initially expected, the FDA might work with the drug company to put certain measures in place. That could be anything from changing the recommended dosage to implementing more intensive monitoring guidelines for patients taking the drug. Sometimes it even means launching public awareness campaigns to make sure healthcare providers and patients are aware of the potential risk and how to minimize it.
So it's a way to be proactive and manage potential safety issues that might not have been obvious during those initial trials. It's kind of amazing, isn't it? It's not just about looking back, it's also about shaping how we use drugs in the future to make them safer and more effective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the connections go even further, like what we learn from RWE can actually help shape the design of future clinical trials. For example, if real-world data shows that we need more information about a drug's effectiveness in a certain group of patients, a future trial might be designed specifically to answer that question. Or, if RWE unexpectedly reveals a potential benefit for a condition that the drug wasn't originally intended for, that could lead to a whole new area of research. It's really a cycle of learning and refining our understanding.
It really is. What happens in the real world informs our understanding, which then helps us improve how we do research and how we regulate medications. It all comes full circle.
Exactly. Real-world evidence is like this essential feedback loop, constantly giving us more information about the safety and effectiveness of medications as they're used by a much broader and more diverse patient population than we typically see in those initial, carefully controlled clinical trials.
So, to kind of sum things up for everyone listening, the big takeaway is that this continuous monitoring, fueled by all these different data sources and some really powerful analytical tools like AI, is absolutely vital. It's what shapes the decisions made by regulatory agencies, keeps drug labels updated, and guides the development of risk mitigation strategies. It's all about ensuring that medications are used as safely and effectively as possible.
And when you consider how much real-world data is becoming available all the time and how quickly AI technology is advancing, it's really mind-boggling to think about how our understanding of drug safety and effectiveness will continue to evolve in the years to come. It's pretty exciting to think about the potential of learning from the real-world use of medications and how that might shape the future of healthcare.
I agree. It's definitely something for all of us to keep in mind as we move forward. All right, that's all the time we have for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in to the deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See y'all next time.